Prime Minister Modi's first visit to Moscow for bilateral has attracted world attention. This gesture reaffirms Russia's importance in India's foreign policy. The summit between India and Russia were held annually for almost last 2 decades, but it was disrupted due to COVID pandemic and Ukraine war. The physical contact between the two countries has been revived at a time when geopolitical balance is moving. Today, we are privileged to have with us Ambassador Pankaj Saran, who has served as Indian ambassador to Russia. He will help us make sense of the Prime Minister's recent visit. So, I'll begin by asking you that in one of your articles to the mainstream media, you've mentioned that Prime Minister Modi's visit to Moscow does not signify India's support to Russia's actions in Ukraine, just as India's interactions with the West do not constitute a stand against Russia. How do we put the summit in perspective?
Yeah, firstly, thank you, Atir, for inviting me to your show. Great pleasure to be here with you. Sir. Look, as you said correctly, we have to realize that this visit took place after a gap of 5 years. And this is when we were supposed to have annual summits. Right. So, this is a restoration of a process. Insofar as the question of supporting Russia and the Ukraine war is concerned, the position India took at this summit is exactly the same it has taken from day one, which is that we have advocated for dialogue and diplomacy. And I also believe that at a time when tensions are high, it is important to reach out to all sides and to assert that, look, dialogue and diplomacy is something which is beneficial. It will reduce tension. And of course, there were concerns on the Indian side which were expressed by the Prime Minister to Russia. Similarly, with the West, we have also been advocating a return to dialogue. So I think on both sides, what India is trying to do is to bring in this prospect of trying to resolve the difficulties, not through war, but through dialogue. That's the way I would look at it.
Right. So the US officials have expressed concerns regarding Prime Minister's visit to Moscow as it coincided with the NATO's summit. And they perhaps have an impression that India may be taking Indo-US relations for granted. Is that a correct assessment on their part?
No, not at all. There is no question of taking any relationship for granted, whether it is with the United States or with Russia or any other country. Countries do not work like this. They do not take relationships for granted, especially when those relationships are critical and crucial. And this includes, above all, the relationship with the United States. They know more than anyone else how much the current Prime Minister and his government has invested in the relationship in the last 10 years. It is a well-known fact. And the relationship today has gone to very, very different higher levels. So I don't think there is any element of taking anyone for granted. The point here is that this visit should not be seen as being against any country, but it should be seen only in the sense in which it was held, which is to maintain the relationship with Russia, which has been an old friend, and to review and discuss the status of the bilateral relationship. After all, in the last few years, the energy imports have grown. There are other dimensions. You want to plan for the future. I would read this visit more as an ongoing, continuous process rather than any dramatic gesture on behalf of India or Russia. And, it was rightly pointed out by someone, after all, he's visited the USA 3 times in the last 5 years. And this visit to Russia has come after 5 years, the first time. Right. So I think we have to see everything in proportion.
Right. After the Russian visit, NSA Ajit Doval spoke to his US counterpart Jack Sullivan. Later, a statement was released. It said that both India and US have agreed to work closely to further advance India-US relations, which are built on shared values and common strategic and security interests. How do you see this development?
No, it's interesting. It just shows that there is an ability on both sides at very high levels to talk to each other on any matter which causes concern, either in Washington or in Delhi. I would say that this kind of conversation helps to clarify doubts on both sides, and I'm sure that the Indian NSA would have explained the visit and put it in perspective. And, the dialogue with the United States today transcends the bilateral dimension. It includes dialogue on global issues, on our relationships with China, with Russia, with in the Middle East, in West Asia. So it is part and parcel of that dialogue. And of course, we share values with the United States, above all democracy, pluralism, diversity, preservation of human rights. These are values which are precious to India. And the relationship with the United States is built on those common values. And they will always remain essential to the development of the Indo-US relationship. Having said all that, I think it is also a fact that the United States understands that there is a certain element of how India conducts its relationships with the rest of the world. And this is something which the United States has to accept, that as a sovereign nation, India will have interests. We are located in different geographies, which has an impact. We have different levels of prosperity, of technology, of income. The United States is the global power. India is not a global power. We are, at a certain stage of our development, we have different priorities. So there will be, and there are bound to be, some differences. But that's okay. I mean, that applies to any relationship.
Right. Sir, in one of your pieces, you have stated that Prime Minister Modi's visit to Moscow reaffirms the importance that India attaches to Russia in its foreign policy. PM Modi was also conferred with the highest civilian order, the Order of St. Andrews, the highest Russian civilian honor. But does this mean that India has gained prominence in Russia's foreign policy as well?
Again, I would not like to get into individual episodic events, because they are okay for that moment, but they do not capture the long-term trend or the fundamentals of the relationship. Or, if it's a good relationship between friends, we have to look at the trend line. If we have tense relations or hostile relations, we have to look at the trend line. Individual events should not be magnified. Look, the fact of the matter is this award was conferred by Russia on the Prime Minister not today, in 2019.
Right.
5 years ago. It has taken 5 years for the Prime Minister to actually visit Russia and accept the award. So the conferring of the award did not happen this year.
Right.
It's something which happened many years ago.
Absolutely.
And the acceptance has happened now. So we have to see that in perspective. And obviously, India has also given highest level awards to Russian leaders in the past. This is a tradition that is fairly common between friends. Prime Minister Modi has received similar awards from many other countries for his contributions. So I would see it largely in that spirit. Obviously, as I said, the basic premise is that India and Russia are friendly nations.
Right.
And therefore, everything that happens between them has to be seen from that prism.
Right. During his visit, Prime Minister Modi gave a statement saying that his interaction with President Putin was on the war situation was reassuring. Does this indicate that an important aspect of Prime Minister Modi's visit was aimed at bringing about peace in the region? In 2022, he had made an emphatic statement saying that this is not the age of war.
Of course. I mean, it is obvious that when Prime Minister talks to Russia, and in this instance went there, the question of Ukraine and other global conflicts, whether it's West Asia or anywhere else, would definitely have come up. And clearly the message from the Prime Minister in public, as we know, and I'm sure was repeated in private, is that India believes that the way forward is through dialogue and diplomacy, not on the battlefield. And I think that is a consistent message that India has given to Russia and to the West. And I think at this point in time, this is really the only message that needs to be sent and the only message that needs to be heard.
Prime Minister's statement made it very clear that India is not taking any sides, and that it is saddened that Ukrainian children were bombed in a hospital. How significant is this statement?
No, it is important because what the statement indicates is that the visit is not and should not be construed as endorsing any of Russia's actions or endorsing the whole war that is going on.
Right.
And that is really the most important point to be taken, that we do not condone loss of life, casualties, and as far as we are concerned, the solution has to be found. But at the same time, India is not a mediator. We have to be clear.
Right.
India may at best be a bridge between the two sides to try and promote some kind of a dialogue between them when they are ready. But I don't think the Indian side is ready to play the role of any mediation, because remember that this is a conflict which involves the richest and the most powerful military nations on the planet.
Right.
So there is enough maturity on both sides to de-escalate and wind down, because if you do not, and if the intention is to continue the war, then of course we are headed into a very, very difficult period ahead.
So the summit was very significant from economic point of view. The fact that we are buying crude from Russia is important, but economists say that our trade deficit with Russia is a matter of concern. Do you think that we should work on building on our capacity to produce or manufacture goods which Russians can buy from us?
I think so, absolutely. The answer is yes. Of course, whether it's Russia or China or the United States or anyone, there is no question but to increase our capacity to raise exports. Exports both of goods and of services. Now this spike in the import of energy, oil from Russia in the last 2.5 years was unnatural and a direct fallout of the Ukraine conflict.
Right.
Because we were able to procure at discounted rates. And since we import 85% of our energy, it is incumbent on the government to ensure that we import it at the cheapest possible price.
Yes.
Because otherwise, you're doing huge damage to the Indian economy. Remember, 85% of your energy is imported. So you have no option. But in terms of the larger question, once again, of the trade balance and the composition, there is no question that we have to work very, very hard. Two things. Number one, to increase our exports to Russia. And number two, therefore, to narrow down the deficit and balance it. And for this, we also need a decision on how to make payments for the trade. Because of the US sanctions and Western sanctions, the payment systems are disrupted. So we have to discuss whether we conduct the trade in national currencies or in third currencies like the dirham or anything else. So these are issues which I think today are very much on top of the agenda.
Right. Defense deal, fight against terrorism, trade, energy, development of land and maritime connectivity were some projects on the table. What are the key ways from the joint statement released after the summit?
I think it's good to see that there is a very sharp focus on the economic dimension of the relationship. And the kind of problems I mentioned have been noted in that outcome document, which is, solving non-tariff barriers, looking at payment mechanisms, looking at how to balance the trade, looking at how to leverage mutual complementarities. Remember, Russia has the world's largest natural resources.
Yes.
And India, for its own growth, requires natural resources of all kinds for the next 10-20 years. We need to ensure that we have access to those natural resources. It is again critical for India's own development. So if we look at the relationship, we have to look at what is of benefit to India. Then of course I think the other issue which came out, which I noticed, was the focus on connectivity. They talk about the International North-South Transport Corridor. They talk about the Chennai-Vladivostok Maritime Corridor. These are very important projects of a long-term nature. They've also talked about how India can collaborate in the Russian Far East, how India and Russia can collaborate in the Arctic. So these are all issues, these are all areas and sectors of cooperation which are going to be very important.
So we can only guess that both the nations would have also discussed delicate issues like Russia-China ties, Indo-US ties, and its impact on our 70-year-old traditional friendship with Russia. What is your take on this?
Well, I'm sure if you go by past practice, when countries like India and Russia, when they meet, obviously they talk the bilateral, but they also talk about the global situation and the regional situation. Maybe in the region where Russia is located, in the region where India is located, and then of course the global strategic picture, and they exchange views. And so I would not be surprised at all that they have discussed both what bothers the Russian side, what bothers the Indian side. But apart from that, the fact is that the relationship is important both for its bilateral significance as well as how the four major powers, Russia, India, China and the United States, how these four proceed forward in their mutual interactions, and how bilateral relationships impact third country relationships, and how those relationships impact on our bilateral ties. So obviously with Russia and China, the fundamental difference is that China is an adversary, it is a strategic challenge. Russia has been a friend, is a friend. We do not have a common border. There is a lot at stake for us, as I indicated, to maintain the friendship. The United States is a critical key partner for India in many, many ways. We need it for our national development. The challenge for Indian diplomacy is going to be how we can interact with all these powers while ensuring that we maximize the benefits for India and how we advance these relationships for the sake of India's national development, which is the primary goal. We have to understand what is the end and what are the means to that end. The means to that end are how you interact with the rest of the world.
Right.
It's not an end in itself. The end is to increase your GDP, to solve the problems of your people, to increase your national power. And then once you decide this is what I want to do, then you say, okay, this is I will do with country A, B, C and D.
Right.
That is the way I would put it.
Sure. Ambassador Saran, thank you for participating in this conversation and sharing your perspective.
Thank you, Atil. Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Likewise.
Thank you.